Welcome to Monday Motivations, 52 weeks to a more purposeful you. And I am so excited to have my new friend, Amanda Bracken, on the show. Thank you for joining us today.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for asking me to come.
Yeah, I'm really excited. We're going to be talking about responsibility. So let's see what week we're in. We are in week 33, and it's all on responsibility, but a little bit about Amanda before we get into our topic. So Amanda is an entrepreneur at heart. Her passion is helping leaders who love their people lead well, whether with her own team or helping other leaders with theirs, creating atmospheres of excellence in order to reveal the significance of others is what she lives for. And one thing that I just loved when we had our first chat the other day was how passionate you are about people mattering. And it sounds like that's your driving force on, why you work with leaders to lead well and create healthy environments. And so I thought this topic on responsibility was going to be perfect. So
I love it.
Yay. So what did you think of the topic?
Well, so when you sent me that, I dove into it and I thought the immediate thing that I thought was, wow, like not only is responsibility freeing for us and being able to take responsibility, we take responsibility for ourselves, but as it pertains to issuing responsibility and placing it in the right place and knowing how to do that is the thing that gives us clarity and freedom the most.
Okay, I want to know about your little dog because I hear a dog barking. Tell me what's his or her name?
They never do this. There's two of them, and I am so sorry because I'm like, they've never done this. They usually just lay.
Love it. They're
toy poodles. They're toy poodles, and they have decided all of a sudden to get this wild, playful. I don't even know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Maybe not during the show, but after the show, I've got to see them.
Okay, definitely. So now one of them has decided to just lay where he normally lays. And then the other one took off in the other room, but they must have just aggravated each other for like a brief moment. And then they gave each other a timeout. So
it sounds like they took responsibility and they gave the liberation.
That's right. That's right.
So as you were saying, you mentioned the part about responsibility creates freedom. And then you started to talk about how it, what was the second part?
Well, as I was reading it, I think about, not taking responsibility isn't ours, right? So that's a two-part freedom. So for anyone that has an understanding of codependency, we know that so often the person in codependent relationships will take responsibility for another person's actions or emotions. And so just having a clear definition of what responsibility is and what we're supposed to take responsibility for and what we aren't is the place that I find, and the best word I can come up with it is wholeness, right? Like that becomes a place of being my whole self. Okay, I did this. I own this. I take responsibility for this. These are my choices. These were my actions, whether good or bad, right? These are the repercussions and the consequences of it, good or bad. And what would I do differently? How would I do it differently when it happens again? But what can get murky is when we don't really know or other people will put things on us that we feel the burden to take responsibility for that isn't ours.
Blame or I really like that you're bringing up this subject of the murkiness, because in every relationship at work and at home, it can get confusing. Actually, my husband and I just had a growing conversation, we will call it, last night. And I was taking ownership for my part. And I totally didn't see his part in this particular conversation. Trust me, I put blame on him plenty of times, but in this conversation, I was like, okay, I did this, I did that. I was taking ownership. But then he started recounting the situation from his point of view, and he was in full-blown clarity of ownership. And all of a sudden I realized, oh my gosh, I was taking more than 100% responsibility for my part. So I love that you're bringing up the murkiness in
Yeah.
responsibility.
Yeah. I think that being able to have clearly defined boundaries in what we are actually responsible for is the thing that helps us live and walk in that with ease. If my words have affected someone, then I will take responsibility for choosing words that had an impact that was negative on another person. If that person blew up in anger and went and, did all these things, I cannot take responsibility for their actions in it. I can't take responsibility for the way that they are emotionally dealing with and showing up in it. I cannot. I can just acknowledge that I said something that hurt them. That's all I can take responsibility for. And so I think having those clearly defined lines are what allow us to, first of all, it's what gives us permission to be ourselves, right? Good, bad, ugly, all of it. We can just own it, and it doesn't make us any better or any worse. If we make mistakes, we're human. We're humaning together in a very imperfect way. But so often I think that people will say, well, I wouldn't have done this if you hadn't have done that.
Right.
Right. And so really what we're seeing, and if we're the person that says that, then that's us not taking responsibility.
Yes.
If I'm the person that said, well, you did this, so of course I went off the rails and da 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 da. No. I went off the rails. I raised my voice. I went and gossiped, whatever you will, because that's a reflection of me and how I'm dealing with it. Right.
Yeah. And
So
yeah, and I think when we have these conversations, it's almost like there is a space to hold for how another person's actions impacted us, but
yes.
how we articulate that is going to tee up responsibility for both parties, or it's going to tee up that murkiness that you were talking about. So in that example of, well, I did this because you did that, we could, another way to say that would be, when you did this, I reacted by doing that. So
Right.
it's still acknowledging there was an action over there that had an
Yes.
impact on me,
Absolutely.
but it's owning it. And I think there's a big difference between the skill part of being able to take ownership and then the will.
Yeah.
So it's the skill is like when we're giving these examples of language, that's like skill, it's technical, but the attitude of our heart, that's the will part. Like, am I still blaming the other person?
Right.
Or am I really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's in all of us to want to. I think about the conversation. So my two littlest ones are 9 and 10. And so my 10-year-old is notorious that if he makes a decision that I hold him accountable to, he'll say, but Evie did da da da. And I'm like, but I'm not asking you to worry about Evie. She's not your responsibility. Evie makes choices and I will deal with those with her.
Yeah.
I'm dealing with you because you made this decision. You chose this.
Yeah.
And so that's instilling a sense of responsibility even in them. Like I say to them, you know the rules. You understand the consequences if you make this choice. If you make this choice, I'm assuming that it's because you wanted the consequences. And so like so often he'll say to me, he's like, so even just last night, I said, you're mad. And he said, I am. And I said, why? And he says, because I would like to go to the pool because my friends are at the pool. And I'm like, oh, I get it. So you're mad at yourself because you chose something that the consequences were you weren't able to play with your friends today. And he was like, I guess. But right. I mean, that's how we instill in them. You knew this was wrong. You chose it anyway. You understood the consequences. Now you have to take responsibility for this choice. And whereas normally, like, if he catches me on a day where I'm really tired, he will be like, no, I'm mad at you because you're the one that grounded me.
Yeah.
And that's the difference, right?
Yeah, that's the difference. Yeah. Oh, It's so great. Like to just, I needed this refresher. It's so funny because I wrote this so long ago, and then I go through and I read them and I'm like, I needed this refresher. Like
Yeah.
the quote at the top, you must take personal responsibility. You cannot
Mhm.
change the circumstances, the seasons, or the wind, but you can change yourself. That is something you have charge of. And I'm just wondering, Amanda, if, like, has there ever been a time where you were on the brunt end of injustice, being misunderstood, false accusation, where like you're not responsible but getting blamed? Like, how do you create responsibility
Mhm.
in a situation like that?
So, I mean, I'm probably going to go really personal here, and do it as from my perspective.
And no apologies needed. Like, this show
Thank
is all
you.
about vulnerability, transparency, sharing. We're all adulting together. So
When we talked, I'm like, I don't really know how to do it any other way. So I'm sorry on the front end. Like you always, for me, I can be prone to setting myself up for a vulnerability hangover, but then I'm
oh, I
like,
do too.
you know,
Go for
so
it.
um, I went through several years ago a very unexpected divorce. And one of the things that was really important to me in that season was to not put myself around people that would just say things to me that I would want to hear, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Mhm.
And as I was going through the legal processes, there were some things that my attorney said, you have every right and should stand firmer in this. And it felt to me like that because somebody else chose to do this, what was being asked of me was to retaliate.
Mm.
And what I knew is that I was responsible for my actions based on my identity, not based on what somebody else does. In other words, I'm the only one that could define me and how I wanted to show up and who I wanted to be. And so I had said on the front end, as a person of faith, I had committed to God, I want to walk through this representing to the best of my human ability, grace and kindness. And when there were some things that would happen, it seemed like it would be an easy thing for me to retaliate in some way in kind, right? In the same way.
Yeah.
And I refused. And with people around me, and I'm not saying that this was right or wrong for anybody else, but for me, in a season where I felt like that I was kind of losing my whole life anyway and losing myself, the one thing that I knew that I had the ability to hang on to was my identity and who I was going to be. And so I had a deep sense of responsibility for showing up like that, not because of anyone or their choices, but in spite of.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the hardest thing for me to ever go through because I was aware that that put me in a vulnerable situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say that there were times where did I do it perfectly? No. How can anybody? You can't. But my commitment was those were at least going to be the two filters that I made every single decision through. Whether or not anyone else knew it, felt it, or interpreted it that way,
Or
I
understood it.
knew or understood it.
Yeah.
Yes, because to some people it was like, well, you're just weak, you're just, you're just giving in, you're not a fighter, you're not fighting. And I'm like, first of all, I thought, well, you have no idea my life and my story and what I've fought through.
Yeah. And what you're fighting for.
Yes, what I'm fighting for. Yeah, as a mother of 4 children, knowing that I had 4 sets of eyes on me through the whole thing, what they walked away with seeing and will be able to tell the story about what their mom did down the road by far outweighed any immediate results that could have happened in that. So, but that was me taking responsibility when it didn't feel good.
Mm-hmm.
When it wasn't like, thank God I'd had that commitment on the front end, because there were times, I'm not going to lie, like, I'm like, I mean, I felt like this, like things just kept coming at me and coming at me. And I'm just like, I can't, just
Catch your
being
breath.
pummeled.
Yeah.
But if those were just my two guiding lights, and I would go so far as to say that had I not had that, I could have lost all sanity. And who knows what we're capable of in that state, right?
Yeah. Well, it makes me think of that scripture, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil
Mhm.
with good.
Yes.
And you said so many beautiful things. I was taking notes, but I loved what you said about your commitment to, you said my commitment was to run everything through those two filters.
Yes.
And I think for anybody listening, I know the big topic is responsibility, but we're kind of funneling responsibility into how do you have responsibility when the wrong thing is happening to you, whether it's betrayal or
Yeah.
whatever, getting fired or divorce,
Mhm.
and falsely accused, what a friend betrays you. It's really, what is your commitment? Like, how do you want to come out on the other side?
Yeah.
Because I think it is easy to just start defending yourself, protecting,
Protecting.
fighting back.
We get in that self-protection mode. We want to protect our story. We want to defend our perspective. It causes us to actually see more narrowly as opposed to more broadly. I think accountability is huge. Accountability and responsibility go hand in hand, because we can talk ourselves into anything we want to believe if we're left to ourselves, right? And so then in that sense, then we can say, well, I mean, I am taking responsibility for, and then fill in the blank for however we've wanted to define that narrative.
Right.
Right. But without accountability, in other words, people that we trust having insight into what we're doing and what we're like, I can say that I'm taking responsibility for something, right? And you can say, wow, that's amazing. She's really like just going for it and taking responsibility for the fact that she forgot to feed her dog. That's huge. When the reality is I haven't fed my dog in 2 weeks and I beat my dog. Okay, but like, and all I'm doing is just saying to you, I forgot to feed my dog today.
Right.
So where is the accountability? Where is the
Yeah.
structure around us that's like, actually, like you see it in part, but there is more to this picture that you need to see. And who is holding me accountable to take responsible for the right things, for what is true.
Yep. Oh my gosh.
So,
You said so many good things. Okay.
I don't beat my dog or forget to feed my dog, by the way.
I know. Yeah. Nobody be calling SPCA or PETA. Okay, couple things you said. I want to tie these all together. At the beginning, you were talking about not looking for people to validate us. So when we're in a narrative, when we're seeing our situation from, like, as soon as something unfair happens or we perceive to be unfair,
yes,
we're like self-protection mode.
Yes.
I'm going to protect my story. And then we go and we start talking to people, retelling our story and finding people who will chime in with us and validate. So what you're throwing out there, what you're offering is the need for community in terms of, are there people around us who will speak truth?
Yes.
And hold us accountable, hold us able to take ownership for our piece in it.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Because so often, we want that comfort. We want that. A friend of mine and I were just talking today, and we're like, when we're in the fire, we want water. And we can oftentimes think that getting a cool glass of water means agreement and people around us, when really that's just kerosene on the fire. So one example that I'll use is, I knew, and I only knew it because I had sat in leadership training and under some of the best leaders in the world. And I felt a sense of responsibility for what I'd been taught and what I had actually taught for so many years. I knew that the most dangerous place I could be in is to only surround myself with people that would agree with me, or that would only see my perspective. And so
highlighter,
so I know that that's our propensity, right? Like we want to put ourselves in those safe positions where everybody will affirm and validate. And I knew that that would have the potential to take me out and help me not see truth. And I want to see what's true more than I want to see anything else in the world. And so, so a perfect example of that was, this is weird, but we were separated for 10 months before a divorce was filed. And I never told my mom. I never told my mom because I knew that, because my mama loves me. And in a mama's true defensive fashion, I knew that she would just get on that train. And I knew that she would say things about my children's father that were not going to benefit me. They were not going to be good for me, as I needed to process and make wise choices that were grounded. Right. And so I knew that I was asking to navigate another difficult conversation when it was all said and done, because it made sense that she would say, "Why didn't you tell me?" And so I had to just be really honest and say, because I could not hear what I knew out of the goodness of your heart and protection of me, you would continue to say. And I just couldn't have that in my life. I couldn't have that happening in my ears as I tried to find the whole truth. So I think about it like, the beach ball, it's like this. And you've got your one person on the one side and they're like, this ball is yellow and white. And that person's right. But I'm on this side and I'm like, no, it's red and white. And I'm right. And I needed people around me that were like, over here it's yellow and white, and over here it's red and white. And my tribe got really, really small in those 2 years. Really, really small.
So I'm trying to figure out all this social media stuff and make a reel or a story or something, but I heard this once on a Joel Osteen podcast, and I wrote this out, and basically that approximately 25% of people will like you, respect you, and cannot be influenced otherwise. And then 25, give or take, % of people don't like you, don't respect you, and cannot be influenced otherwise.
Wow. So that leaves the other 50% to be
So then the other
influenced.
25% like you, respect you, but can be influenced otherwise.
Okay.
And then 25% don't like you, don't respect you, but can be influenced otherwise. And so I being a I personality, Enneagram 7, like I'm like, people like me, love me. And this was so helpful to me, because what I realized is I really cherish these two groups, because I can count on these people having my back and speaking the truth, but they also might have blinders because they like me and respect me. So then
nothing will change that.
And nothing will change that. So then I can count on these people to say and criticize me in ways that these people will never criticize me. And I will take this with a grain of salt, because I know the motives are ill, but I'm like, this is where I could find potential blind spots. And then these people, it's like, okay, Grace, love them, but it's like you were saying, your tribe gets very small, because it when we're doing something that makes this group uncomfortable, this group gets louder. And this group gets exposed. So before we might have felt like our tribe was 75%, but it's really always been 25%.
Right. So, that's good. That's a really good illustration there. I like it. I think about, even as it pertains to responsibility and what is it like, you mentioned the word blinders, or what I would call as blind spots, is first of all, the acknowledgement is we all have them. We just do. We will. One of the best questions I ever learned actually comes from Andy Stanley, and it's this. And I started to infiltrate this in my leadership culture, my feedback loop with culture work is, what's it like to be on the other side of me?
Ooh.
And what we know is that we can't say to another person, no, that's not right that you experienced me that way. We can't say that to people, right?
Yep.
But what better way to get insight into what our potential blind spots are than to ask the people on a regular basis, what's it like to be on the other side of me?
Mm-hmm.
We can't know how we're really impacting people.
No.
So anyway, that's good.
I love that question. And I mean, imagine asking it, like, and will people have the courage to voice up?
Well, you have to give permission to speak freely. With my team, I always had a once a week meeting that was called Permission to Speak Freely. And it was where anybody can say anything. And there's no repercussions. And anytime a new team member would come on, they would be like, she doesn't really mean it, right? And so some of the people that have been with me for a long time, they're like, no, she does. Like, for real, she wants to know. And even down to the internship level, right? Because in a meeting like that, there's no hierarchy. There isn't. So the reason that I want to know is because I want to be better for them. Yeah. Again, we go back to what we said in the very beginning, people matter. Yeah. And when you have any sense of authority, power, leadership, whatever word you want to put there over people, you are going to impact them one way or another. Mm-hmm. So it's best that we know how we're actually impacting them.
Yeah, because we think we're doing it one way and it's coming out a completely different way.
Yes. Yes.
This is so good. Oh my gosh. We could keep talking all day, but I want to stay on track. So let me
sorry, I'll take you right off. I'm so sorry.
I'm like, let's do 2 hours today. No. Okay. So in closing, what's one little nugget of truth or wisdom that you'd like to share for yourself and for others on the topic of responsibility?
On the topic of responsibility, I think it's not going to be anything new or aha or profound. I think just be okay with being imperfect and being on the journey. And if you don't know, say, I don't know, but I'll find out. And take responsibility for anything that you have done or said. None of us get to say, that wasn't my choice. None of us. If it came out of my mouth, if it was an action that I took, then I own it. And it's not even personal, you know?
No.
It doesn't make me less than. It's not going to make you less than. It just says, oh, this is where I am on the journey. Sometimes the best thing we can do is say, I don't know what I don't know. And I hate that for you because you're on the other side of me, but I'm committed to learning. Right. So yeah, I mean, responsibility, you know, we haven't really tapped into it at all, but we've kind of tapped into it, is boundaries. And what does it look like to set healthy boundaries in communication, and then being responsible for those and being responsible for holding true to those, right? That's how we stay our truest selves, and we don't give ourselves over to things that won't serve our health well. I think that's the goal. The ultimate goal is that we function in health, whether it be spiritually, mentally, emotionally, or intellectually, right? So,
yeah. Oh, this was so good. I can't thank you enough. And for anybody that wants to stay in touch with you or learn more about your work, I think you have a podcast. It's going to be launching soon?
It launches at the end of this month. The Heart of Power. It is a podcast for leaders who love their people. And the essence of it all is like, what does it look like when leaders power over? What does it look like when leaders power with? And what are the impacts that either of those have on your teams and the culture? So,
it's going to be so great. I can't wait.
Yeah.
So, okay, everybody find her podcast, The Heart of Power, Amanda Bracken. And for all of our listeners and followers, let's see what we're going to be talking about next week. We're going to be talking about value. So, and I have a wonderful friend, Brenda Reese, who's going to be our guest. So everyone have a great week. And thank you again, Amanda. And
Thank you.
more Monday motivation to come.
Yay.
Bye.